Hello everyone and welcome back to the match Jose Raul Capablanca versus Juan Corzo. It's the 9th game of the match, so far we've seen we've seen only 2 games, but the first 2 games in the match were lost by Capablanca. Then he adapted to the playing style and to his opponent. Then he won 2 games. We already won 1 game that he won, but both of the games that he won so far, the one we've seen and the one in game 4, the one where he avoided the Evans Gambit and went for the two nice defense, were with the black pieces. So here Capablanca has the white pieces, and it's really just a wonderful game. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. And with the white pieces, Capablanca opens the game with d4, which in those times this match was played in 1901. We've already said that, but the d4 in those days was considered to be a lesser move, not for stronger tournaments or anything. But to Capablanca, who didn't know openings, who didn't know any opening theory, he just played what made sense to him and what he considered to be a principled move. It wasn't until 1904 when Harry Nelson Pillsbury finished first ahead of Emanuel Lasker in a very strong tournament that d4 was acknowledged to be a top-tier move for very strong tournaments. I believe a year ago or maybe more, I made a video. I called it The Man Who Invented the d4. It features a game between Harry Nelson Pillsbury and Emanuel Lasker. I will put a link to it in the description below. It will be the first thing you see, so maybe if you're interested in older games, you want to check that out as well. But okay, d4 by Capablanca, and now d5. Knight to f3, we have c5 by Juan Corzo, the cross variation. In those days, white still didn't go for the c4, the Queen's Gambit, but as Capablanca wasn't aware of any opening theory, it does really come as a surprise. e3, defending the d4 pawn, and knight to c6. And okay, b3, preventing black from expanding with c4 and also preparing to fianchetto the dark square bishop. We have e6, bishop to b2, knight to f6, and now knight bd2. Both players simply continue developing their pieces on optimal squares. C captures on d4, E captures on d4, and now bishop to d6. And you can see that both white and black have excellent development. Black has already 2 knights out, the bishop is out, black is ready to castle, but as in most cases where white opens with pawn to d4, black will have some problems developing the light square bishop and the queenside rook. Bishop to d3, we have castles, Capablanca also castles, and now comes knight to h5. Here Juan Corzo wants to push f5, and also if Capablanca allows it, maybe play knight to f4 to attack Capablanca's strong bishop on d3. So Capablanca prevents this, g3, takes away the f4 square from black's knight, and now comes f5, creating a very strong outpost for this knight on e4, so the knight will now jump back to f6 and go to e4 if needed. We have knight to e5, Capablanca also creates a very strong outpost for his knight on e5. Knight goes back to f6, and now f4. And okay, black can either allow this knight to remain on e5, Juan Corzo decides to eliminate it. We have bishop captures, pawn captures on e5, and now with knight to e4, it's probably the most correct move. You can either now have the same choice. You can either leave this very strong knight to be on e4, or you can exchange, and then after pawn captures, the f-line opens, and but it will always be a better position for white. So here Juan Corzo, instead of knight e4, goes knight g4, already looking for adventure. The idea is knight e3, of course, to attack the queen and the rook. Capablanca defends it, queen e2, and now comes queen to b6, going after the d4 pawn. Knight to f3, Capablanca improves the position of his knight. Also now the bishop and knight defend the d4 pawn. Bishop to d7, developing finally the light square bishop. Now this rook can also come into the game. a3, taking away the b4 square from Juan Corzo's knight. And king to h8. Now there's the possibility of this knight remaneuvering from perhaps h6 to g8 to e7, or maybe h6, f7, then to push g5, maybe open up the g file, play rook g8. A lot of attacking ideas for black are possible. Capablanca kicks away the knight, h3, knight h6, and now queen to f2. Preparing the king g2, but also the queen is now controlling the d4 pawn with the bishop, so now the knight can move. Knight to f7, preparing g5, and now comes king g2, improving the position, getting out of this diagonal, and now g5. And here Capablanca plays the very interesting g4, a very nice move. It's also an attacking move. Black can never afford to capture here, because after this pawn is captured, look at this very strong bishop, the rook is coming to h1. it will be impossible to repel this attack. You can even double up rooks here, bring the other rook into the DH file as well. It will be simply too much for black to handle. Also, you don't really have the option of pushing f4. White will still open up the position with h4, go rook h1, bring the other rook there. It will be again overwhelming for black. So after g4 we have knight e7, controlling the f5 square, but also maybe preparing knight g6 to come to f4 or h4 if needed. We have queen to e3 by Capablanca, preparing knight captures on g5, so Juan Corzo defends the g-pawn, and now comes rook 8 to e1. Now the final rook is developed, and we have knight to g6, preparing knight f4 check, or perhaps knight h4 check. It depends on what Capablanca plays. First, Capa goes for g captures on f5, and now we have knight to f4 check. We have king to h2, and now comes knight captures on d3, eliminating Capablanca's very strong light square bishop. Queen captures on d3, and now comes e captures on f5, finally recapturing the pawn here. And also we have two very strong pawns here. If this g4 advancement is about to happen, then it can be very dangerous for Capablanca. But we have c4 here. As you can see, Capablanca has this very strong dark square bishop here, who so far wasn't really a part of this game other than protecting the d4 pawn. But if you look the king on h8, then if the position opens up, let's say d5 and d6 are played, then the black king will be in a lot of trouble. So here, perhaps the best idea is to simply start attacking with g4. But Juan Corzo wants to prevent this pawn from being pushed here, and also he wants to bring the queen into the game. So here he plays queen to e6. But this simply doesn't work, and it is up to you. Capablanca, of course, figured out why it doesn't work, but you can also figure out why it doesn't work by pausing the video here and trying to figuring out the correct response. I will give it a couple of seconds as usual. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, Capablanca played c captures on d5. And now, if you just move the queen, then e6 is coming. So you have to capture on d5. Queen captures, and now comes the move you had to find, e6. Regardless of the fact that the e6 pawn is protected twice, you cannot capture with the queen. Of course, the rook is covering the pawn, but if you capture with the bishop, this still doesn't work because rook captures, and now if queen captures d5, this comes with check, and you lose the queen. Not only you lose the queen, but after you give up the queen, you have to give up the rook, and you are now getting checkmated. It's an easy game for white. So after e6, Juan Corzo does have a move. He plays bishop to b5. He attacks the queen. And here Capablanca could simply move the queen, give up the rook, pick up the knight, and he will have a very strong attack. But Capablanca decides to play this game with great style, and he goes for queen captures on b5, removing the queen from d5 so he can advance the pawn. Queen captures on b5, so a very nice queen sacrifice, and now d5, this comes with check. Black has to make a move. You could just give up the knight, but then the knight would be captured and you would again have to give up your rook. So first rook to g7, and here comes e captures on f7. So what do you play here? It's a very delicate position. You cannot move the rook. The rook is pinned. You have a very dangerous pawn here. The queen has to keep an eye on the e8 square constantly. If you play something like queen captures on d5, then rook e8 check will win you the game. Rook captures, we have pawn captures, bringing a queen into the game, and then after the queen blocks, still you can block with the rook as the rook is pinned from the bishop, queen blocks, and now you can play anything. Rook e1, and it's game over. Let's say h6, knight captures. You still cannot capture with the rook. If you capture the queen, then you're just down too much material. After you capture, this comes with check. Queen h7, rook e8 will be checkmate. Just a couple of ideas what would happen if the queen ever leaves control of the e8 square. So here Juan Corzo played h6, but there really isn't much better move to do. And this comes with the idea of moving the king to h7. Of course, you want to unpin, so you would force a white to capture here, but at least you will be able to move some pieces, and the white will lose a very strong piece. Here, Capablanca goes knight to d4. There was a better move, but we're going to get back to that as it's a bit of a long story. Sorry about that. Knight to d4 comes with an attack on the queen, and here you don't have the luxury of moving the queen. If you play queen d7 or something, knight captures an f5 is coming, and then, I mean, there's simply too much pressure here. You cannot even block, as the pawn is also controlling the g8 square. Here you would have to capture an f7, and then comes the bishop captures. King to h7, and now rook to e6. There's not much you can do. Rook captures an h6 is coming. If you play something, then you can even get checkmated. But you are losing the game either way. So here, after Capablanca's knight d4, Juan Corzo does not retreat, but rather he grabs the rook here. Queen captures an f1. And this is most likely the move Capablanca missed. Otherwise, he would have found a better refutation of this h6 move. But like I said, we're going to get back to that. So queen captures on f1, we have rook captures on f1, and now rook captures on f7, finally getting rid of this pawn. There aren't any good discoveries here. You cannot connect the knight's jump to any of the rooks. So first, rook captures on f5, rook captures, and knight captures on f5. King to h7, and now you can see Capablanca has a knight and the bishop against a rook. Of course, this is better in itself. But here someone would go, perhaps you could start improving the position with your king, you could start pushing the passed pawn, but the move Capablanca plays is the absolute best. Here Capablanca played knight to e7. And now when you see this, you understand that black is completely lost, and there is no move black can make, because the bishop and the knight create a wall here against the black king. See, the knight is controlling g6 and g8, and the bishop is controlling g7. So the black king can never approach the position, and there are no useful moves for black. If you attack the knight, simply d6 is coming, and your knight is stuck there. d7 is coming. So here Juan Corzo continued the game. He played rook to f8. Juan Corzo also found a very interesting idea that he can use to his advantage. King g2. Capablanca prevents rook f2 check, but also starts bringing his king into the game. We have h5. d6 now starts pushing his passed pawn. g4, h captures, and now bishop to e5. The bishop now is guarding this pawn, so the knight is free to move. And here, the knight and bishop still create a wall against the black king. And if the black king is ever to enter the position, you have to enter the position via h6. But here's the problem. King h6 is indeed, perhaps, I mean, it is the engine's favorite also, but it simply doesn't work. Now that the king is on h6, Capablanca can further advance his passed pawn. We have d7. Rook blocks pawn, and it seems like there's no way to protect the pawn, but this is why it was crucial that if the black king is to enter the game via king to h6, now it doesn't work. So again, I ask you to pause the video here and try to find Capablanca's idea, what happens after rook to d8. Once again, I'll give you a couple of seconds. For those of you who were able to do it, congratulations, you are an excellent endgame player. And for those of you who just want to enjoy the show, knight g8 check. This is, of course, the problem. Now, if you just move the king, let's say king g6, the knight remaneuvers himself to f6. The knight now is defending the pawn, and it's all over. Bishop to c7 is coming, and it's game over. So here, after knight to g8 check, this was played in the game by Capablanca. Juan Corzo captured the knight, and now comes bishop to f6. Simply control the d8 square. We have king to g6 attacking the bishop, but now comes pawn to d8 with a queen. Rook captures and bishop captures. Here Capablanca has 2 pawns and a bishop against 3 pawns. Black does have a passed pawn here, but it's of little use. But like we said, Juan Corzo found a very interesting idea how he can try to draw this game, so we're gonna show it, gladly. b5 by black. We have king to f2. Capablanca starts bringing his king into the game. King to f5. And now comes king e3. We have king e5, king to d3. You don't gain anything by pushing the pawn, as bishop c7 check will simply pick it up. So king d5, king comes to c3, and now comes g3. Bishop to h4 attacks the pawn, pawn to g2, and now bishop to f2, controlling the g1 square. So how does Capablanca win this? We have a5, and here, this was Juan Corzo's plan. If Capablanca plays a4, perhaps here, perhaps he doesn't know how to go about this game, then the game would end in a draw. This is the problem. Here Juan Corzo can simply capture, and after pawn captures, then you see you have the wrong bishop, because you only have one pawn, and that pawn queens on a light square, and you have a dark square bishop, so this is a draw however you play this. But we're just going to show it. Let's say king c8, king c4, king b7. Black just has to occupy the corner, and it's a draw. King b5, let's say king a8, king captures here, king b8. Now the king can move to start bringing the pawn up the board, but let's say king here, a5, king b8, a6, king to a8, a7, and now black will simply queen his pawn, and after the queen is captured, it's a draw. The king and pawn create a wall against the black king. It is stalemate. So for those of you who are perhaps new to chess, and perhaps you didn't know this, but if you have a position like this, you don't want to create a passed a pawn, because this pawn queens on a light square and you have a dark square bishop. So Capablanca plays b4. Of course, now if pawn is captured, then you will have a b pawn. But Juan Corzo, of course, ignores this. He plays king to e4. We have bishop to b6, now attacking the a5 pawn. And now comes king back to d5. And we have king to d3. We have king to c6, and now bishop back to g1. Now Capablanca is just using his bishop to outmaneuver the black king. We have king d5. Black now again reaches opposition, but Capablanca doesn't care. Simply bishop to h2, forcing the king to move, either forcing the king to move or to lock the position here, and then slowly but surely white king will improve his position. If you capture, again, white will then have a b pawn, which will soon be a pass pawn, and of course it will be a winning pawn. Also notice that if you ever capture with the b pawn here, b captures here, then it will still be a draw. You will even if you pick up both of the black pawns, you will still have two a pawns, and both of them are queening on a light square, so still a draw. It doesn't matter if you have 6 of them. So here Capablanca simply played, Juan Corzo goes king back to c6. He's trying to repeat the position, but now using the bishop, Capablanca forced the king to move away out of opposition, and king d4 starts improving the position of his own king. a4 blocking the position, but now king e5. The king comes up the board. King b6, we have king to d5, king to a6, and here Capablanca played king to c5, and now there are no squares for the black king to go to keep protecting the pawns, and it was in this position that Juan Corzo resigned the game. Why did he resign? After he moves, king captures here, then king captures here, and then with the two connected passed pawns, of course, it's a winning position. But before I forget, that very cool moment where I believe it's move 31. Yeah, a rook to g7 was played. The queen has just been sacrificed. Pawn captures on f7 was played, so the rook is still pinned. Here Juan Corzo played h6, and we said that Capablanca played knight d4 here, attacked the queen, and then queen captures on f1 was played. But there is an even greater move. The move is actually knight to h4. But this move was found much after this game was played. I believe the engine Ripka was the first to have discovered this move. Kasparov also mentions in his book My Great Predecessors that Capablanca was somewhat lazy, and if Capablanca actually started calculating, and in that variation where knight comes to d4 saw that queen captures on f1 would have prolonged the game, maybe he would have decided to start calculating and found knight to h4. Knight to h4 is a really powerful move. Because the threat is very simple. The threat is, we already mentioned, the queen cannot move. The queen has to constantly keep an eye on the e8 square. The threat is knight to g6 check. The rook will not be able to capture it. And after the king goes to h7, then the pawn can be promoted, as the knight from g6 will also be controlling the f8 square, and it's game over. On the other hand, if you capture the pawn, then comes rook to g1. And now with the bishop and the rook from g1 attacking the rook on g7, it's game over. Whatever black plays, let's say queen d7, Then you get bishop captures on g7, king to h here, and now you get you can even bring a knight into the game with check. Force black to capture it, rook captures, bishop captures, and now you have two rooks and a bishop against the queen, but also it's a forced mate in 11. Rook to g7 is coming, a rook here is coming, not much you can do here. You can give a couple of checks, queen c7 check, white will block, you can try queen c2 check, again rook g2 blocking, queen d3, and now rook e7 check will be winning. King h8, bishop to g7 check, king g8, bishop e5 check, king goes here, and now after bishop to f4, there is no defense against the bishop captures on h8, checkmate. Whatever you play, let's say queen f3, bishop captures on h6 is checkmate. So a very interesting move. It's also 43 moves instead of 63 moves that was played in the actual game, but yeah, I think either Capablanca saw that he's entering an endgame which is winning, that he saw that bishop and knight will be creating a wall against the black king, so the black king will not be able to enter the game. So, but I remember when I read Capablanca's book, sorry, okay, what's the name of it? It's a series, I can't remember it. I will put it in the description below. But he often, after finishing the game, he often showed a way how he could have won the game using a combination instead of just playing. But as Capablanca always said, if you have to complicate chess, then you don't understand chess. If there's a simple win, just go for it. So yeah, that's the game. I do hope you enjoyed it. I do hope you enjoyed both both Capablanca's idea and the idea that was found much later after the game was played. I would like to thank Johannes Kroschwitz, Lester LaForce, Nicolas Cretu, Eric Labelle, and Kurt Mulder for your contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot, I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check two of my previous videos here. They will now both be games by Jose Raul Capablanca. Thank you all, and I will see you soon with some more interesting content by the Cuban genius Jose Raul Capablanca. Thank you all, and I'll see you soon.